the tools you need right now is praise, which you did really well at, right? Meaning generosity of the heart. And you will need connection, which is also what we did in the jar exercise. There's also the sexy stuff, but the jar exercise is for one specific slice of both polarity and intimacy, which is newness, right? So you were asking, how is this jar, how are these exercises? It's about doing things that are different. One of the very big pieces in polarity that have nothing to do with the man does this, the woman does this, but one partner does this, the other partner does this, is newness. Nothing's more exciting for the body mind of a human than when it's fresh, when it's new. Hence people do role play, or like I said, different dungeons on different days, or it's freshness, it's newness. And that's not man-woman specific, that's human specific. And the reason I've made these cards is that we all crave different flavors. And most of us are monogamous, right? We want that from our partner. So our partner will have to learn different expressions and things like that. And then you can have endless fun erotically. But what you are talking about is you've had a hard time, you've gone through a rough patch. So your job is to lean heavily into things you can do for connection. So on your jar exercises, you're going to be probably light on the erotic and heavy on the inside connection, like being together. You'd lean heavily onto doing things that get you on the same page, and not so much doing things that create strong attraction, meaning polarity. And that's why this particular workshop has both. We teach you how to deal with the bodily overcoming of old patterns, but we're also looking at what do you need from your partner specifically. And so you're probably not going to have a lot of let's hang, from the chandeliers in chains and whips, right? And a lot of let us walk hand in hand in nature, talking about how we're doing. And that is true for your moment in relationship. And in my work, we talk a lot about purpose of relationship, right? And every relationship has seasons. And you're not all in the same seasons. So you have to apply the tools as to the season. It's just, if you want good eroticism, you can learn how to bring your energy down in your body. You can learn how to exchange energy. You can bring newness. If you're stuck, you can bring newness, but in connection. So to answer your question, how does it work? Well, in these bits and pieces that you hopefully fleshed out for yourself, your partner can give you something that you are craving or wanting. And it's going to be not necessarily what your partner wants, but it creates newness and it creates tension. And that tension is the polarity, it's the attraction. Or you can use the same exercise to learn what your partner needs if you're having to come back together, and you'll read, she wants 15 minutes on the couch getting praised. Cool, I can do that, right? Most people want to give their partner what they want, and it's not always easy to know because we typically want to give our partners what we want. You probably noticed, right? And of course that doesn't work, right? Because you're just essentially porting your desires on your partner, and they want something totally different. So this is one way to play with understanding difference and understanding resonance. And this brings us back to what has changed, what's the same, right? Which is also what you are asking. The thing that is always the same is that we as humans want to joyously and erotically interact with our chosen human, right? And our chosen human doesn't necessarily have to be even the opposite gender, right? That's not always true. But also our chosen human isn't like any other chosen human. right? So we learn the principles so the two of you can play however you want to play according to your gifts and strengths, right? Because a lot of what I've seen, I've been at this now for 27 years, right? A lot of what I've seen in the prescription is that people give up their natural gifts for the dogma. That happens all the time, and I know a lot of relationship counselors who are essentially dooming their or stunting their clients' growth by giving prescription instead of actually saying, oh, this person is better with money. This person also happens to be a woman. She is not in her feminine. This is bad. Give the money over to him, who has no freaking idea how to manage money. So there's a constant tension in the relationship because actually nobody plays to their strengths, and it's a constant annoyance. That's a huge disservice to a relationship, right? So instead of making it about men and women, you go, what are you good at? What are you good at? What do you most enjoy? What do you most enjoy? And so ideally, I'm using you because you're sitting here. Ideally, she says something like, right, she's a human being, so she might say, I've just sold my business, so now I want to really relax. I like going on an adventure. I would like to be the one following along while he takes me on some new adventures, but then next week I have something that I want him to do with me. I'm going to take over. And it's not like he always leads, she always follows, he manages the money, she goes, new shoes. It's no one actually is like that. If they're naturally like that, fine, right? But most people are not. Most people have layers and layers of competency, and our job in these workshops and in counseling and in everything is that you find what you're really good at, and you offer that as a generous gift to your partner in the form of praise, in the form of taking them somewhere, in the form of giving them the experience that they want, and then they do the same for you, and then you have a functioning relationship. And that's very different than, breathe like this, look like this, stand like this, and it's gonna work out, Of course we have preferences, sexual preferences, food preferences, energetic preferences. You can play to those preferences. Absolutely, that's why in these exercises, we look at who likes to follow, who likes to lead. But for instance, in the jar exercise, I forgot to say this, you take turns. It's, one person leads, the other person leads. You'll find out really quickly where your strengths lie, but you can't have a relationship. I got an email the other day from some guy who goes, we are into dominance and submission play, but it really doesn't work outside the bedroom. Can you give us tools on how to make our whole life about me dominating her? And it's like, are you fucking insane? What woman in her right mind would want to be dominated by you day and night, right? That's insanity. That's not a relationship. But they have these ideas that every moment of their day should be like that, and then of course it goes massively wrong. And so even when you have a preference, you have to be able to mitigate that preference, because also, like let's say you always want to lead, she always wants to follow as a preference. Well, you're gonna sometimes get tired, or you might be sick suddenly, or whatever, right? Things happen in long-term relationships. What do you do if the masculine pole suddenly is in bed with two, casts on their legs for 6 months? Is that the end of the relationship? Do you have to get divorced? No. You're gonna figure out another way to enjoy life. And hence you have a preference, but you can't just play to your preference, because it becomes very dull. It's no longer, there's no contrast, there's no pulse. It's just like, okay, you're on top, I'm on the bottom, I'm gonna go, take me. And, it doesn't work like that. So you have a preference, but the whole game of really having excitement and vitality in your body, and with that in your sexual life, is adventure, essentially. right? If you learn nothing about polarity in here, the one thing to know is do something new. It immediately enlivens your system. It immediately enlivens your body. It immediately turns you on just by the fact that it's different. And it's, everything we've just talked about with newness is actually also true for particularly perimenopause, menopause, when it comes to the more like the hormonal changes, where essentially you can no longer rely on your go-to patterns of arousal, for instance, right? You suddenly, the stuff that's always worked no longer works. And then it's quite horrendous, right? Nobody knows what I'm talking about, right? And then you try, very often we try to insist on that pattern of arousal or that way of getting into it or turning ourselves or the other person on, and it just doesn't work. And so that kind of spirit of adventure, so to speak, where you go, well, this isn't working, what else could work, where you essentially enter into some pretty wild experimentation on bizarre shit you think of at 3 a.m, right, is really important. And sometimes that actually means, once again, that's where the rhetoric and the whole thing comes in, is sometimes that actually means less polarity, more connection. It sometimes means dialing it back to body breathing, body-to-body, communication, dialing it back from, sexual stuff to massage or kissing or just laying together, where you essentially go, well, this isn't working, but there are many, many other things I haven't done in a long time. Let me do those and see what works. And then you'll notice that because hormones, this is true for men as well, who eventually, have a drop in testosterone. Yeah, exactly. It does. It happens for men exactly like it's a different thing, but it happens as well. So you can just insist on being horny 16-year-old or 26-year-old, or you can go, well, we've developed in any other area of our lives. Why not learn some new things in that? And in a functioning relationship, instead of making each other wrong for it not being what it used to be, you go, let's go on an adventure. I know what we're gonna do. We'll buy one of those sleazy tantra books and we'll do every exercise and we'll go yes, no, right? Whatever, right? Or you buy The Joy of Sex and you go chapter by chapter. Really, like silly stuff where there's instruction videos or whatever, and you just go, well, that's weird, let's try it. Right? And then you go, well, no, that wasn't it. And then the next one you go, wow, that was actually interesting. Let's, and so it goes out of there's something wrong with our relationship into, well, we are different people. Things change. Many people's children are leaving their homes and your hormones go and your job changes and your hair falls out and, you get sick, whatever, right? You have to adapt your sexual and your relational life the same way you have to adapt how you deal with your body or your bank account. It's no different. And I think because of the way societally the entire perimenopause, menopause, and andropause and all of that isn't really dealt with, because you're supposed to stay young at all costs, and you're only sexually viable if you're young, right? Which is so not true, obviously. But because of that, we don't have options. And it's the same thing that Steve talked about. You just get calcified. You think that's it. You're done. Things look different, feel different. That's the end. But in fact, that's when real stuff starts, because you're no longer just driven by your hormones and biological programmings, and you can actually grow as a human. And you can grow in relationship, and I think that's what this is all about. This is the only reason to come to a workshop. It's not because we can fix you. It's because there's endless tools that some of which will work for you, and then you have new skills and new tools, and hopefully that will take you somewhere where you haven't been before, or reminds you of something you've done before. And then you can actually own it. You don't have to, constantly get another fix. You can just do what works and then gather some new skills eventually, or come for play and not because something's wrong. No. Which I prefer. You come for play.